most people have no idea just how big the German diaspora is. We're talking about at least 70 million people of German descent living outside of Germany right now. 70 million. That's the population of France or the UK. And honestly, it's probably way more than that when you factor in all the people who've assimilated into their new countries or who just don't even know that they have German roots. So how did Germans end up everywhere? I mean, when you think about German immigration, places like the US or even Argentina might come to mind. But there's one place I definitely didn't expect. Jamaica. Yeah, Jamaica.
You have Aki?
Last month Aki spoiled.
I came across this video a while back. It's a Jamaican guy in what looks like Jamaica having a chat with a white family.
His birthday is coming up this week on the 16th.
Ooh.
Now when I first heard the woman speak, I thought, oh, she's Irish.
I'm Debbie, I'm 55.
55? 55?
Me born 55.
But then it hit me, she's not Irish at all. That's a full-on Jamaican accent. Turns out her great-grandfather was German, and that blew my mind. So what's the story here? Well, after slavery was abolished in Jamaica in 1834, the island had a labor crisis. Plantation owners still needed workers, but enslaving people wasn't an option anymore. So the Jamaican government started bringing in European immigrants to fill that gap, Germans included. This was part of something called the Bountied European Immigration Scheme. Now, there weren't that many Germans, around a few thousand. But they settled, they had families, and today there's still this small, tight-knit community of German descendants in places like Seaford Town, where that video was filmed. And what's really cool is that even though they've largely assimilated into Jamaican culture, you can still see hints of their German roots in their architecture and in the stories people tell about their heritage. But Jamaica is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. The truth is, Germans have spread out across the world for centuries, through everything from colonization to expulsion to simple economic migration. They've gone everywhere, from the Americas to Africa to Eastern Europe and beyond. And each time, they left a mark on the places they settled, shaping economies, blending with cultures, and even influencing languages. So in this video, we're going to take a look at just how far the German diaspora has expanded. We'll dive into the countries they moved to, the reasons they left Germany in the first place, and the lasting impact of their migration. This is the story of how Germans ended up everywhere. The story of Germans spreading across the globe, it really starts here in Central and Eastern Europe. And we're going way back to the early Middle Ages. At this time, most Germans were concentrated in the Kingdom of Germany, while Slavic peoples dominated the land to the east. But by the 12th century, Germans began pushing eastward in large numbers. From around 895 to 1400, a population boom in the German lands led to what historians call the Ostsiedlung, or settling eastwards. This wasn't just random migration, it was actually encouraged by local rulers in places like Poland and Hungary, who saw value in bringing in skilled German farmers and craftsmen to develop the land. These Germans brought with them advanced agricultural techniques that helped reshape the landscape. They cleared forests, built towns, and turned previously uncultivated land into farmland. But while this development helped boost economies, it also displaced the local populations, creating a complex dynamic between the new settlers and the Slavic peoples already living there. By the 1300s though, things slowed down, hard. The Black Death swept through Europe, killing millions, and the migration came to a standstill. Now fast forward to the 17th century, another wave of immigration was about to begin, this time because of war. The Habsburg monarchy, which is modern-day Austria and Hungary, was locked in a brutal conflict with the Ottoman Empire. Vast swaths of land were devastated, and the Habsburgs needed settlers to rebuild. German farmers, particularly from the region of Swabia, were invited to move into the Danube River Valley. These settlers became known as the Danube Swabians, and their arrival reshaped the region for generations. But again, this migration wasn't just about opportunity, it was also about the Austrian Empire's border strategy to repopulate war-torn areas. Meanwhile, over in Russia, something else was brewing. In 1763, Catherine the Great, who was a German herself, issued an open invitation to migrants, especially farmers, to settle in Russia. Russia had just annexed new territories along the Black Sea and needed skilled laborers to cultivate this land. But it wasn't just about farming. Catherine offered German migrants a bunch of incentives. No military service, exemption from taxes, and religious freedom. Thousands of Germans answered the call, creating two major groups: the Volga Germans, who settled along the lower Volga, and the Black Sea Germans, who made their home in Crimea and the northern coast of the Black Sea. This migration was also a lifeline for religious minorities, like the Mennonites, a pacifist religious group who were facing persecution in Prussia. By the 19th century, Eastern Europe was packed with German communities. Any major city would have a German quarter, and German villages were scattered across the countryside. Germans had become a vital part of the social and economic fabric of Eastern Europe, but this was also when the tide started to turn. Nationalism was on the rise in Europe, and a newly unified German empire had dreams of uniting all Germans across Europe. Meanwhile, in Russia, Tsar Alexander II was pushing for Russification, the idea of making all subjects more Russian. The freedoms that had lured so many Germans to Russia, they were being rolled back. No more military exemptions, restrictions on speaking German in public, and a push to adopt Russian culture. A lot of Germans felt betrayed, especially groups like the Mennonites, whose pacifist beliefs didn't fit with the new policies. Many of them packed up and left for the New World, places like the United States, Canada, and Brazil, where they hoped to keep their traditions alive. But more on that later. Jump to World War I, and things got even worse. For the first time in over a century, Russia and Germany were at war, and suddenly, German communities in Russia found themselves in the crosshairs. Many were seen as potential spies or traitors. The Russian government responded by deporting around 300,000 Germans, many from Volhynia, which is now Ukraine, to Siberia. By the time World War II hit, there were still millions of Germans living all over Eastern Europe. But Hitler had a plan. He wanted these Germans to resettle in the territories Nazi Germany annexed, like Poland, and he worked out population transfers with Stalin to make it happen. Nearly all the Germans in the Baltics and thousands of Bessarabia Germans from the Black Sea region were relocated. Also during World War II, things escalated further. After Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin began mass deportations of ethnic Germans to labor camps in Siberia and Central Asia. By the end of the war, over 1 million German Russians had been exiled to these camps. This was part of Stalin's broader suspicion of ethnic minorities, many of whom were also targeted for deportation during the war. And after the war, the face of Central and Eastern Europe changed forever. The Allies agreed to redraw Germany's borders, and millions of ethnic Germans were expelled, evacuated, or fled. An estimated 12 million Germans were displaced, making this the largest forced migration in recorded history. By 1950, only about 2.6 million ethnic Germans remained in Eastern Europe, just 12% of the pre-war total. Today, the story of Germans in Eastern Europe has all but faded. Most left after World War II or during the Cold War, with over 1 million more moving to West Germany by the 1980s. The Germans who remain are a small minority, spread out across countries like Poland, Romania, Ukraine, and Russia. Many have blended into their local cultures, though remnants of their presence, villages, architecture, and surnames still exist today. Let's shift our focus to the German diaspora outside of Europe. This is where things get really interesting. Germans didn't just stick to their neighbouring countries. They spread all over the world in waves, and for a variety of different reasons. For the rest of this video, we'll break down where they went, why they left, and the lasting influence they had on these new places, some of which might surprise you. So let's start with the country that has the largest German diaspora outside of Germany, the United States.
In a land where freedom and justice reign.
The latest US Census from 2022 estimates that there are about 41 million German Americans. That's 12% of the population, making up around a third of the total number of people with German ancestry worldwide. While a few Germans came with the English settlers early on, the first permanent German settlement wasn't established until 1683 in Germantown, Pennsylvania, later becoming a part of Philadelphia. But after that, the floodgates opened. German immigration to the US came in two major waves. The first wave took place during the colonial period, from the 1680s to the 1760s. Most of these Germans were Protestant, coming to escape religious persecution and economic hardship in Europe. Pennsylvania, upstate New York, and the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia were the favored destinations. And you've probably heard of the Amish, one of the most famous German-American groups. Along with them were the Mennonites and various other Protestant denominations. They formed a distinct cultural group known as the Pennsylvania Dutch. And no, they weren't Dutch at all. The term is actually a misinterpretation of Deutsch, meaning German. The second and much larger wave came after the American Revolution, between 1820 and World War I. This wave brought nearly 6 million Germans to the US. And unlike the first wave, They didn't just stick to the East Coast, they moved west, especially to places like Ohio, Illinois, and Wisconsin, where land was more abundant. They were also much more diverse this time around. It wasn't just Protestants anymore, many were Catholics, and a lot of them weren't even coming from Germany itself, but from Eastern Europe. This included Volga Germans from Russia and significant numbers of German Jews. Over time, many German Americans assimilated into broader American culture, often identifying as just white American. But their cultural impact has remained significant. A lot of the foods we think of as quintessentially American actually have German roots. Hamburgers from Hamburg, and hot dogs, that's from Frankfurt. Now let's hop over the border to Canada. There are about 3 million Canadians with German ancestry, roughly 9.6% of the population. But the German immigration story here took a different path. When the US declared independence from Britain in 1776, many German loyalists, especially the Mennonites, wanted to stay under British rule, so they headed north to southwest Ontario, which was still a British colony at the time. This immigration continued into the 19th century, and by 1871, 55% of Waterloo County in Ontario had German roots. But another significant wave hit in 1896, when Western Canada became a prime destination for German immigrants, especially Russian Mennonites fleeing persecution in Tsarist Russia. The harsh climate of the Canadian prairies felt oddly familiar to them, since they had been farming in similar conditions back in southern Imperial Russia. After World War II, there was yet another wave. Over 400,000 Germans moved to Canada between 1945 and 1994, many coming from former German territories that were no longer part of Germany due to the redrawn borders after the war. And now let's talk about a surprising destination for German immigrants, Mexico. While it's not a country typically associated with large German migration, it has a notable German population. It all started in the 1830s, when Texas, which was under Mexican rule at the time, attracted Roman Catholic Germans due to shared religious values. But when Texas became part of the United States in 1848, many of these Germans chose to resettle within the borders of modern-day Mexico, particularly in areas like Tamaulipas. Later in the 1890s, the Mexican government launched a policy of blanqueamiento, or whitening, by encouraging European immigration to quote-unquote improve the country's racial makeup. As part of this policy, 450 German families were resettled in the southern state of Chiapas to help with coffee production. In the 1920s, another wave of Germans came to Mexico, though this time they weren't directly from Europe. About 6,000 Russian Mennonites fleeing from Canada after the new education laws imposed secular English language schooling moved to northern Mexico. To this day, their descendants live in places like Chihuahua, keeping their language and traditions alive. Today, German influences can still be felt in Mexican culture, especially in the country's music. The accordion, which is a key feature of traditional Mexican music, was actually introduced by German immigrants. Now, the German embassy estimates that there are about 75,000 Mexicans of German descent, but after decades of intermarriage and blending with other cultures, many of them may not even know about their German roots. Surprisingly, Mexico only ranks 4th in Latin America in terms of German population. Many more Germans actually headed further south. Let's start with a country that has the second largest German population outside of Germany, Brazil. Estimates suggest that between 5 and 12 million Brazilians have German ancestry today, which is pretty massive. So how did Brazil end up with so many Germans? Much like the US, Brazil saw a huge wave of European immigration throughout the 19th century, as millions of Europeans fled poverty for better opportunities in the New World. For Germans, it all began in 1824. Brazil had just gained its independence from Portugal, and now they had a vast country that needed to be developed and defended. One of their main concerns was their sparsely populated southern region, which they feared would be vulnerable to invasion. At the time, Brazil couldn't rely on Portuguese immigrants because they had just broken away from them, so they turned to Germany. Many Germans took up the offer to move, and they became the first major group of European immigrants in Brazil. They mostly settled in the southern states of Paraná, Santa Catarina, and Rio Grande do Sul between 1824 and 1829. Then, starting in 1845, German immigration to Brazil really picked up. These immigrants founded cities like New Hamburg, Blumenau and Joinville, which still have strong German influences today. In fact, if you visit some of these towns, you might feel like you're walking through a German village thanks to their architecture. But here's something interesting. Germans weren't the largest immigrant group in Brazil. In fact, they were far outnumbered by Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, and even Japanese immigrants. So how did the German-Brazilian population grow so much? One big reason is their high birth rate. German-Brazilian families were known to have a lot of children, where 10 or more wasn't unusual at the time. Now let's head just south of Brazil to Argentina, where a similar immigration story was unfolding. Between 1870 and World War I, Argentina experienced a boom in beef and wheat production, especially around the Pampas region, in provinces like Buenos Aires, Misiones, and Entre Rios. German immigrants, particularly Catholic Volga Germans fleeing Russia, were drawn to Argentina, partly because of Catholicism as the official language. After World War I, German immigration to Argentina surged even more. The US and Brazil had tightened their immigration policies, and the economic situation in Europe was deteriorating, so Argentina became an attractive alternative. Many Germans made their way to Argentina during this time. Over in Chile, a similar trend was taking place. Starting in 1848, the Chilean government actively encouraged German immigration to help colonize its southern regions, which were underpopulated. Now let's address the complicated history during and after World War II. As Hitler rose to power, many German Jews and anti-Nazi opponents fled to these three South American countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. But after the war, things took a darker turn. Several South American countries, most notably Argentina, became notorious for creating rat lines, secret escape routes used to help Nazi war criminals flee Europe and take refuge in South America. Argentine President Juan Perón was particularly sympathetic to the Nazis and allowed many high-ranking officials to enter the country after the war. Today, the German influence in South America is still substantial. Argentina alone has an estimated 3.5 million people of German descent, with around 2.5 million of those being descendants of the Volga Germans. Over in Chile, there are an estimated 500,000 people of German ancestry. Let's zoom out of the Americas and take a look at Oceania, where Germans were also making their mark in the 19th century. Two countries in particular, Australia and New Zealand, have significant populations of German descent that date back over 200 years. The first Germans to set foot in Australia were actually part of the British Empire's colonisation effort. In 1788, when New South Wales was still a penal colony, Britain shipped thousands of convicts from Europe to settle the land, and at least 73 of those convicts were German. But real German immigration to Australia didn't begin until 1838, when waves of old Lutherans from Prussia began settling the newly established colony of South Australia. This kicked off a much larger movement, which was followed by the arrival of the 48ers in 1848. These were Germans who had fought for democratic reforms and human rights during the revolutions of 1848 in Europe. After their uprisings failed, many of them fled to places like Australia to start a new life. Meanwhile, across the Tasman Sea, New Zealand also saw their fair share of German immigration, particularly from northern Germany. Germans in New Zealand established rural communities on both the North and South Islands, contributing to the development of those regions. During both World Wars, Germans living in Australia and New Zealand faced a difficult choice. They had to assimilate to avoid the hostility that came with being associated with the enemy. Many of them even anglicized their names to blend in. But despite this, the German cultural imprint remains strong, especially in the winemaking industries. Today, Germans are the fifth largest European ancestry group in Australia, with the latest census recording over 1 million Australians of full or partial German ancestry, while in New Zealand, there are over 200,000 people with German roots. Now let's shift to Africa, where the German presence was vastly different from other regions we've covered so far. Unlike in the Americas or Oceania, Germans in Africa weren't just migrating to colonies established by other European powers. This time, they had colonies of their own. Germans established two key colonies: German Southwest Africa, which is now modern-day Namibia, and German East Africa, which included parts of Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. But for this video, we're going to focus on Namibia, which still has a sizable ethnic German population today at around 30,000 people. The German connection to Namibia started with the missionaries who arrived during the end of the 18th century. Their numbers were small, but they laid the groundwork for later colonization. By 1883, more Germans had arrived, and by 1884, Namibia was officially declared a German colony, a attracting even more migrants until the end of World War I. After World War I, Germany lost control of its colonies, and Namibia, which was then Southwest Africa, was handed over to South Africa. The new rulers tried to South Africanize the region, deporting around half of the 15,000 Germans who lived there at the time. But despite this, German culture and architecture remain strong in places like Swakopmund and Lüderitz, where the influence is still visible today, and German is still widely spoken in some communities. So, after all these centuries of migration, colonization, and the complex history of being both the persecutors and the persecuted, the German diaspora today looks like this. It spans every corner of the globe, leaving cultural footprints in countries far and wide. One fascinating thing to think about is how someone, maybe living in Mexico today, could trace their ancestry through multiple continents. Imagine a family lineage that started in Germany, then moved to Russia under Catherine the Great, only to later flee to Canada to escape Russification, and finally settling in Mexico to avoid secular schooling policies. It's these kind of stories that make the German diaspora and many other diasporas so fascinating to explore. Of course, I couldn't cover every single country with a significant German population in this video, so let me know in the comments about your country and how Germans may have influenced it. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives like this one.